I am using more hardwood, so would you mind explaining a little bit about it?
Yeah, so this stuff right here, it doesn't really matter if it's hardwood or softwood. It's just like the way that you can cut up a log into different kinds of boards, different styles of grain patterns. So there's 3 different styles of grain that you might have heard of. There's like plain sawn or flat sawn, then there's a rift sawn, and then there's quarter sawn. So you have both the patterns of those, and those are actually sawing techniques as well to achieve a board with a full pattern of that in one face. So looking at this, the slab here, this is a flat sawn board, but it has all 3 of those patterns. It has a section of rift sawn, a section of quarter sawn, and a section of plain sawn, because all those things really mean is just the way that the rings interact with the face of the board. So on, let's see here, this is a quarter sawn board. So if you look at this quarter sawn board, you can see how the growth rings are running pretty much perpendicular to the face that you're going to see, and that gives you a lot of straight grain. And in something like white oak, that's when you're actually going to see the ray fleck, which on this table I was trying not to show that because I didn't really like that look for this thing. But if you look on, let's see here, I hid them.
You say ray fleck?
Yeah, ray fleck. So in the tree, so you picture this tree, you got all the fibers going up into the branches, but there also needs to be a way for the nutrients and water to get from the inside to the outside. So there's actually fibers or tissue that go from the center of the tree out, and you only see that when you quarter saw them. So on here you can see these kind of like these streaks here, these straight lines here. Those are pretty small. If you look on the underside, you can see some really big ones.
Oh yes, it's almost like stretch marks.
It is. You know what? Yes, it is. I've never heard that one before. That's pretty cool. So you can get that if you want that in the face of the board. You can do that by actually quarter sawing, which is what this ends up being. But basically, you take a log, you cut a little quarter out of it, and you start taking slices off of it, alternating to get the growth rings to be perpendicular to the face, and that'll give you that quarter sawn look. However, since you're flipping this log around all the time, that's a lot of work, and that's why quarter sawn stock costs more and actually has less yield as well from the log, so it also increases the cost.
Yeah.
Whereas something like this is plain sawn, so you just take the board, the log, and just take a slice out of it, you get a board that looks like that. It's pretty typical. You've probably seen that before.
Yeah, definitely.
But see in the middle, you have all these cathedrals. That's a plain sawn pattern, and then as you get to the outside, you can see how they get into the straight grain. So you have the quarter sawn on the outside, well, pretty close to it. On this side, it's pretty close to quarter sawn, and the rings are pretty close to vertical. And then like the transition area between plain sawn and quarter sawn is called rift sawn. That's when the rings are kind of more at an angle, so maybe like a 45 or so. And that gives you a fairly straight grain. It looks pretty similar to quarter sawn, but you don't have the ray fleck in there. So if you're trying to use something that doesn't have ray fleck, you can use something rift sawn, and you kind of get the same effect. The other thing with quarter sawn is it moves a lot less than the plain sawn area, whereas here, most of the movement is going to occur across the rings. So in theory, this one has more potential for movement in thickness than it does in width. It's about half. So in comparison to a plain sawn board the same size, this would expand and contract about half as much as plain sawn. Yeah.
Which is a big deal if you're making something like a table.
It's just something you have to think about. It doesn't really matter as long as you plan for the movement and you kind of know what's going to happen. It's not that big of a deal. So here I have these 2 boards. They're plain sawn. They'll move quite a bit, and it's outdoors, so it's probably going to experience quite a big swing. So this tabletop is probably going to grow maybe even a ½ inch over the seasons and change. So this is like 36 inches wide. In the summertime, maybe in the middle of winter, it might be down to 35.5 or something. And that's something to keep in mind because it's going to move and it's going to try and do that. So if you try and restrict that at all, something is going to fail because this wood is so powerful.
Yeah.
It's like basically hydraulics in a sense because absorbing moisture in the water. Water's incompressible. It's always going to try and get in there and expand it or contract it as it loses moisture. So in this case, I built this in the summertime. If I rigidly fixed these boards in place and tried to shrink, it would probably end up cracking or breaking whatever is confining it to that motion. So here I have this breadboard end, which doesn't grow this direction, but it would have to in order to stay the same width as the tabletop. But here I have it on basically floating tenons. So these pins are actually in there in slots, so that as this tabletop moves, the slot kind of goes through that pin and it can keep going and moving. And here I only fix the center just to keep it attached. The same thing goes for the way I attach to the base. You can't really see it right now, but I have 3 holes here for for big bolts. The one in the middle is pretty much the same size as the shank of the bolt because I want the movement to go to the outside. So the center's fixed, but then the outside ones here, I drilled the holes oversized so the shank of the bolt can actually move a little in and out. So that way the tabletop stays able to move around throughout the seasons without destroying itself. And the other way too is if it were to, let's say I built it when it was drier and then it tried to expand, you're going to have some interesting things there too, because what you'll probably end up having is it'll probably end up warping because it's trying to get bigger, but it can't on one side. So like the bottom side is fixed, for instance. So if you were like make a tabletop like this and say, you know what, I think I can strengthen this by gluing a cleat to the bottom, like a full length cleat, and hopefully that'll keep it stronger or maybe more stable or something. It won't, because that's going to keep that side the same thick, the same width, and the outside is going to try and grow. So you end up getting this huge cup as the top tries to grow. The fibers up here getting wider and wider. It's being constricted on the bottom, so this will end up going like this.
Yeah.
Big, huge cup.
So does it ever stop, like with age or with is there a certain number of expanse and contractions or seasons that it finally like stabilizes and will no longer adjust?
It will not. The wood is hygroscopic. It's always going to try and reach an equilibrium point to the humidity in the environment. So the only way to stop it is to put your piece of furniture in a humidity controlled environment.
Yeah.
So like museum or something like that, they'll have like rooms that are humidity controlled. Some server rooms, if you're doing like computers, they'll have humidity controlled rooms. So you can put your furniture in there, it won't move. But
not outside.
Not outside. Unless you live, I don't know if there's anywhere in the world it's like totally like static humidity. But if you do live in an area where it doesn't swing that much, it's less of a concern. So like here in Minnesota, where you have pretty decent swings, the biggest thing that'll fix in place is maybe like 4 inches of width. But you may be able to get away with a little more distance depending on where you live and the swings it experiences. But that's also dangerous because people move and furniture moves throughout the world.
Yeah.
So if you build your thing for that one area and then you go somewhere with a lot of humidity swings, there's a good chance that your furniture might destroy itself because it's in a new environment it's not used to or it's not built for.